Hello everyone, hope you're doing well, hope you're looking after yourselves. Welcome to another episode of Behind the Curtain, where we dive into the topics that we discuss on the student guide in a bit more depth with incredible speakers doing incredible pieces of work. As you can see, I've got another incredible, as you can hear more so, we've got another incredible speaker here today to discuss an incredible topic, but you know I don't like to do introductions, so instead I'm going to hand over to our guest speaker for today. Thank you for joining us. Could we please know a bit more about you and what you do?
Well, my name is Odai Quay. I am 31, a graduate of creative writing and English literature, have been for some time. I'm involved with the organization, the Autistic Empire, and I am also producer and host or co-host on its podcast, Audible Autism. And I suppose also in another thing that I'm involved with History Matters, which is a group as far as advocating for Black British historians in terms of the lack of them, but also that's run by noted historian Hakeem Addy. Just something else on the side that I do that I thought would be interesting to bring up.
Yeah, thank you for bringing up. And you have a wide range of incredible experiences, which we will be diving into in just a moment. But we're going to start off with our first official question. And as you mentioned, it's kind of looking at your university, like looking back at university years. So, probably enough, starts off with looking back. So looking back at your creative writing / English lit degree, what parts of university life actually supported you as a neurodivergent student? And which parts made things a bit more difficult?
Sorry to do this to you, but let me start back a little bit further in terms of my journey. So I was in second year of sixth form when I got diagnosed. I was 17 just before I turned 18. And it was by chance, really. A specialist came in and I hadn't had a good first year coming out as far as my grades and everything. And he had a discussion with me, and it must have been the week or two afterwards. He said I may have signs that I have Asperger's, which I know is not a term that people prefer to use now, but that's how it was put across. And I wasn't familiar with it, but I remember one or two friends of mine at the time joking about it, and I thought that couldn't really be me. But I remember it was the day I told my mother and I told my nan, and then we got an email which had the site, which showed some of the potential signs of it. And what was interesting for me was in that moment, my mother didn't just recognize it in me. She recognized it in herself, and my nan, if anything, she could actually trace it back to my great-grandmother, my great-grandmother, I always remember she brings up, she was a lady who couldn't read and write, but she was very good as far as her mental arithmetic went. Now, I did have assistance in sixth form, but it was odd because I had spent all that time as far as up to that point in terms of like having tutors and doing extracurricular stuff and studying in school. But in terms of that kind of support, it was the first time I'd ever had it. So I was a bit hesitant, or I had somebody who was meant to be insistent. And there was a few times I didn't turn up because I'd gone that long without it. So to start was strange for me. It wasn't like neither of my parents didn't ask. We knew I had dyslexia and dyspraxia because my old man's got dyslexia. But when I was in school, whenever we would ask, they would say that my problem was one of laziness, which you can read into that what you would be interested to, especially considering my background is Jamaican Ghanaian. And so their sort of solution was that he's smart, but he doesn't apply himself enough. And if you just push him harder and give him some more work, then at some point there should be a breakthrough in terms of education. And it didn't really happen, which isn't to say that I didn't do well, but it didn't happen in the way that they were hoping it would. So when I got to university, the support that I got there was in terms of new equipment for one, which was a shock, like a copier and a printer and a laptop with specialist software in terms of making notes and stuff to do with like coloring, because sometimes people on the spectrum sometimes are very sensitive to lighting as well. And also preface forms in terms of when I would hand assignments in, I could have that on top and they would be understanding as far as adjustments needed. And also in terms of people helping me pick out books and just getting assignments done as well. It was quite a surprisingly robust thing. But I would say the drawback was I thought upon getting into university, they would be like, right, there's some days I can come in and other days that I will stay home and probably work on stuff. But it ended up being a case that I was pretty much going in there every day, every week, sometimes. And also twice now, I had support people on their team there in my university's LRC. But, and this is unfortunately a trend I can think back as long as I can remember, they both left. And I was the one holding the bag. In the case of the first person I had, he just left unannounced and didn't tell me. And the second person was a lady who was actually in charge of it. And she ended up moving to another department. So the last person, I forget her name now, but she was a lovely woman, this black woman. And she was there with me throughout the rest of my final year. So those were two things when I think back to my experience as well that was rather difficult. Also, I would say this is around it, but at the same time, for my first 2 years, I was working. And I was working in a football stadium. Now, I'm not going to say, just in case, because I know some listeners might be supporters, but it was a place where I didn't exactly want to be there, but the concern, including some of the places I volunteered at, was that I didn't have people skills, which on recollection now in 2026, I feel like the problem, it wasn't that I didn't necessarily have people skills, but as far as being able to work in a team, and they're concerned that if I didn't have anything to show there. But when I was in that stadium or before it, I was basically a nervous wreck because it wasn't exactly a place I wanted to be in. It was also like I knew what kind of people I would be having to deal with. I remember the very first day I was meant to be in there, I got up way earlier than I should have, had breakfast and ate. That's how much. But also the training I got wasn't exactly training. They gave us a demonstration on how the tills worked after a tour and everything. And then it was like, all right, you can go. And I remember I stuck around and was like, wait a minute, that can't be. And then sure enough, they did it again with another group. And then after the first day, they arranged it that they would bring us back to do us a proper organized demonstration. But it wasn't an environment that I wanted, I wasn't suitable for it. It was exhausting. I was on my feet all day. It felt like staff was breathing down my neck. And also just in terms of pay, it felt like for all that I was doing, it wasn't really enough. So, and this was also factoring in that by the end of every day, I was just completely tapped of energy in terms of I couldn't move, difficulty moving, and also just trying to think. And I would get picked on, generally I would get picked up, but then there would be other days where I wouldn't be able to get a lift home. So I would have to go and take the bus. And I stuck to weekends while I was working. There was one day when on the suggestion, it was like, why don't I go in and do it on a weekday? And it was so bad, I never went and did that again.
Yeah. No, I think, firstly, thank you for sharing. And I think it's really important to see, I'm trying to find the best way to phrase this, but essentially it's really important to see the importance of why accommodations need to be made by organizations when it's coming to individuals. But also, again, like you said, and it's not something that's perfect, it's something that always is currently, like, as people are more aware of different of the ways like neurodiversity can present itself in different individuals, people are becoming more aware of like the different levels of support that may be needed. Because I think one key thing from your story is that not essentially everyone needs the same levels of support or needs, or like, you know, for example, one person, you could have two people who are neurodiverse, they might both have ADHD, but they may need different accommodations to basically to be able to work as effectively as they'd like. And that's not an issue, and that's not a bad thing. It's really about like organizations being aware that like, okay, cool, like, you know, neurodiversity, and especially I think one thing to and we may comment on it a bit later, but I know definitely one thing that people say is that like there tends to be like a lot of creatives are neurodiverse, and it's interesting being in that space too, because like there are, especially like smaller businesses that I know of, that it's like, they're like, okay, cool, someone needs an adjustment in their work schedule, boom. So whether that's, you know, someone's like, I might seem like you said, maybe people may say that they were lazy or not really effective in the morning, but they might just say, actually, you know, early mornings don't really work well for me, but I'm the type of person that if you have me working from like, I don't know, like 12 till 6, I'll give you like the best pieces of work ever. Or it could be a case of I'm the type of person that, you know, in a team setting or a group setting, I'm not really like, I might not necessarily always bring stuff to the table, but if you have a one-to-one chat to me, or even if you just let me, you know, like send you my comments in an email afterwards, I'll give you like the most authentic feedback that you could need. So I think, yeah, I guess to summarize, I think one key thing that I've learned from your story was we need to ensure that these like accommodate, like as organization, well, whether you're an organization listening, maybe you're an individual listening, if you're an organization or an individual, accommodations should be made by your organizations to ensure that you can get the support and growth that you need.
I agree. And I would also say as well, and this is something that is a pertinent thing for me, but in terms of the understanding of what it means to be Black and being on the spectrum as well. There are, some of it is, I would say, in terms of my experiences, is unfortunately people maybe not being as accommodating to people who have invisible disabilities compared to visible ones. Especially, I would say, in my case, because as you can hear, I speak very eloquently. Some of that is because I have the assistance of medication. But also, if you was to see me in person, quite frankly, a lot of people would think this guy's probably doing some kind of athletic sports or something. And it's funny. Growing up, some of these things for me were supposed to be, or at least put across to me as they would be assistances for me, you know, when I get older and going to the workplace. But they've actually been the opposite. And the thing with having invisible disabilities is it leads to people getting interpretive. And those interpretations usually boil down to something like, your condition isn't as serious as you're making it out to be, your condition isn't real, or along the lines that or in certain sort of more fringe circumstances, they'd say you've been tricked, or that in one or two occasions, as I have had, including when I was on holiday, I've been straight up told mine don't count. They're not serious enough. The things that I necessarily want or should use are more so for people who are having difficulties. And this is especially quite insulting because I've had long COVID for the past 5 years. It's a conundrum as far as somebody who doesn't totally fit in the cracks, especially considering in the borough where I live, there are things that would assist me, but because I don't fit in neatly, I'm not eligible for them, which is incredibly frustrating and doesn't help my case one bit. The reason I this is something I talk about a fair bit, and I try to get across with people when talking about like race and disability, because there's people out there some people who don't think that the two are interlinked. And I would say they very much are. If anything, I would say, considering I'd like to think of myself as somebody who studied, my radical elders and that, if you were to look at, say, Black radical politics from a certain slant, we've always been addressing disability in one way or, we've always engaged with disability politics, but it's never been framed as such. And some of that, I think, is because, I'm sure there's one or two reasons people think as to why that is the case, but it's in there. There's certain figures and certain ideologies that I think miss me because they only address me as far as being a Black man, but in terms of disability, they lose me because of some of the reasons that I've mentioned already. If there's two things that I would say that I think disability politics and, let's say, Black politics share is, number one, both of them are very vindicationalist politics, meaning they emphasize having to prove something to somebody else. And in this case, I mean neurotypical white people. And they are also politics of reaction, meaning that they didn't happen naturally in their origin point. And I think that some amazing stuff has been done, but they've never totally there's always been one or two flaws with them. And I'm one of those people who's a big advocate in thinking that there needs to be like a better framework for individuals like me, and even people who who might not have these conditions, but, just their way of seeing the world and how it affects them, I think is important and should be valued rather than turned away because people want to pick and choose what kind of qualifies in terms as, like as a Black thing. As far as I'm concerned, number one, as my mother says, Black people are everywhere, even in the places we don't expect. And number two, if we understand the concept of Blackness, why it's been treated the way it has, and why at the same time it's something that is important and should be valued and should be understood, then why can't we celebrate? Why can't we stick up for all the different varieties of Blackness that it comes in? I can think of a couple of reasons why some people might not want, arm against that concept, but I am just like, no, this is a thing that really should be brought forward.
100%. And that kind of leads on to our next question. Because I think for anyone listening who's neurodiverse, or people who maybe support people who are neurodiverse, or anyone sort of like in that space, things such as masking, burnout, and identity are sort of three key themes that they may relate to, they may have personal experience in, or they may know of people who've got experience in that. And essentially, for you, the question is around, I guess to first start off with, did masking show up for you when you were at uni? So whether this was socially, academically, or professionally?
Definitely. Definitely, and including in work. Sorry to interrupt.
No, that's all right. That's all right. So that's thank you. Because essentially it's like, the question is about how did this show up for you? So both socially, academically, professionally, and then it's a two-parter. So I'll ask that. So how did it show up for you when you were at uni, but also like you mentioned at work as well? And what were the signs that you were reaching burnout? What helped you to recover from burnout, and what also helped you to protect your well-being? So yeah, let's start with, how did it show up for you when you were at university or when you were working?
Well, here's something I think that should be understood as far as masking as a non-white person. Traditionally, I think as far as amongst experts, masking is often put across as like a last-ditch effort in terms of if your coping strategies fail and support networks fail, then try to, just mask to try and like keep it going, but don't do it too much because of the harm that does. Whereas I feel like, and I don't know if you relate to it, as a Black person in, say, white majority countries and what have you, masking is the first thing that is emphasized of what you need to learn how to do. Because for, not just in terms of, it's for survival reasons, but also for how to be able to get around and to work with people in that environment. And one of the ways I think that's come about for me is in terms of sometimes in terms of doing tasks, trying to do them all at once, or maybe taking on more than I should have. Or how else would I say it? Just immediately trying to get something done as quickly as possible. And I don't consider myself a very good masker. There's been more than one occasion where people have like tried to get me into where, encourage, or at least in a sense, put across something that I'm not, that I do not feel comfortable with, and it doesn't feel authentic. But also it's an idea that, you're doing it because you have to learn how to play the game. And my problem with this phrasing and this idea of learning how to play the game is that it acts as if the rules are fixed. Jeffrey, do you know what a speedrunner is by any chance?
Like, I know from a video game aspect.
Yes.
Yeah.
So a speedrunner, for people who don't know, is somebody whose whole thing is playing a game through a game in as quickly as possible. There's different ways to do it. Some people just do it in, straightforward. Some people use strategies in terms of exploits to try and get things to go in a certain direction to benefit them so they can have things happen faster. And then there's also people who just flat out break the games that they're playing and use glitches and exploits to get to where they want. And that's kind of a thing, is there's often a dissonance for me where it's like, I know there's alternatives at how to do things, but sometimes it's put across as like, nope, there's only this way that you can do it and you can't budge from that. Which some of that I think it's a pressure to conform from both ends in terms of society around you and also from your own friends and family at times. But also, it's something I've never been a fan, Jeffrey, as far as sometimes the way people talk about the discussions regarding success and failure, because I often find that very, very narrow. And really, there's a lot of people. I mean, you've probably heard this as well over the course, where people are like, we hear there's too many of people who are out there trying to be rappers and entertainers or trying to be athletes. Where are the Black doctors? Where are the Black dentists? Where are our businessmen? And it's never lost on me the fact that all these are these very respectable middle-class jobs, as though that's the only way to be deemed like a decent person. There's a lot of people, there's a history of looking at exceptions, and some of that stems from a time when there was less people in certain positions of like, right, that person's made it, we have to follow suit, and that's not realistic. And some of those people who are exceptions like to downplay how they got there. They act like they got there from their own two hands when they had assistance. Every one of us has had assistance in one way or another, but it's just how it went about and how it got there and how it helped us is in particular. I don't bring this up with disrespect, but I remember having a conversation with this when I think about my own father about this, with stresses I had with work. And two of the examples he gave, because I was also considering doing music at one point, was he was looking to look at Prince, look at how Prince did it, what Prince did and how he got there to be a mega star, and look at Jennifer Hudson. And I kind of took issue with those two examples because, number one, as much as I got love for Prince, Prince was a man who was in bands from when he was like 15 years old. Prince could play a variety of instruments. Prince was a songwriter in his own right. Prince was also somebody who was producing songs at a clip at his peak. I'm not Prince. That's not to knock down my abilities, but I am not him. He is a very particular and rare exception of somebody, who also he knew exactly what he wanted. And he stuck to that. And there's a lot of people who more times they don't, or they're still trying to figure it out. And Jennifer Hudson is a funny one to me because he put it across like she put her songs out there and somebody noticed her and she got famous. That's not how she became famous. She was on American Idol and she didn't even win it. How she got famous was when she was starring in that movie Dreamgirls and she won the Oscar for Best Supporting Actress. And the reason I remember that so vividly is because I remembered the year she won it. That was the year people were expecting Beyonce was going to walk away with a clean sheet, and she came away with nothing. So those aren't exactly models of people who I can follow. The examples I more point to are people who didn't quite fit in, or as I like to call them, pardon my language, my stubborn bastards who marched their own rhythm. Not because they felt they were better, but because they were people who, that's what drove them to that. He's kind of an exception in his own right, but I think of somebody like Samuel R. Delany. Don't know if you're familiar with him.
No.
Incredible man, science fiction writer. He's also done non-fiction as well in the past. He's a black man, part of the, came from the black middle class, but he's also a black gay man, and he's dyslexic. And it's interesting to look at the body of work that he's done, like Babel 17 and Stars in My Pocket Like Grain of Sand, and his non-fiction work like The Motion of Light in Water or Times Square Red, Times Square Blue. That last one is brilliant, but I warn people about the content with that one. It gets very explicit. When, again, he followed his own path. He was very lucky because he got started when he was 20. And also, at that time in American science fiction, even though, as he wrote in one of his essays, there was predecessors before him who had written stuff, as far as we conceive it, he was the first black science fiction writer. And him, Octavia Butler, Grace Jones, my Aunt Valerie, who's so like Grace Jones, it's not even funny. There's a bunch of people I can think of who they found their place and it worked for them. And some of them were difficult people, right? And I'm not going to pretend like they were always the best people in the world, but I'd rather go with that than say the sort of people who are always going to suit and tie events and shopping at boutiques and whatever. I'm not exactly fond of the whole black excellence thing, if I'm going to be honest with you.
No, I completely get that. I guess the second part to the question, which if you feel like you've answered is perfectly fine, we can go on to the next question that we have for you. But the second part of the question is all around essentially what helped you... So the second part, is what were the signs that you were reaching burnout, and then what helped you to recover or protect your well-being?
Well, burnout for me is a combination of things. Number one, my mind goes blank. I notice my body gets stiff and like a lack of strength as well. Also, just in terms of my outlook, it gets very blinkered and kind of shot. And I'm sensitive and can get quite agitated and confrontational with people. It's not a space I like being in, but it's notable. As far as how I recover, often I feel like I just need some time to myself. But there's also been certain coping strategies to do with breathing and also, honestly, just bit of exercise really to help. Long COVID did a serious one on me in about 2020 because up until that point I was active and I was outward bound and I was doing things. Funny enough, when I got proper COVID, I was ill on Christmas Day with it. So this was the year after that. And it's something that left me bedridden and exhausted and very, very short of breath. And in a certain sense, in terms of the challenges for me were, some of it was to do with getting around. Suddenly, distant journeys just to and from my house, I had to think that much harder in terms of how to get around and how to navigate. Brain fog was also a problem. Something that I would say, even now to a certain extent, is I have to stop to take breaks and just to at least get some of my energy back. And that can be a challenge considering certain days it gets very, very wet and rainy. So I'm ending up having to power through or just stop when I have to. And it's quite a few, it's a number of things. I mean, even today, as I spoke with you before recording, I had an incident earlier that had me up to 1 or 2 in the morning. And I felt like I've been moving at half speed throughout the day. So all this, as well as, I will have to say, going through the long COVID clinic as well, it's taken a lot to where I would get where I'm at now. And if you were to meet me, say, even 3 years ago, I'm not sure if I would have really been able to have this conversation with you. But I'm glad there's still some ways to go, but I'm in a better place than I was back then, definitely, because in the earliest stages, I could barely walk past my next door neighbor's front door. That's how bad it was.
So, no, thank you for sharing. Thank you for the honesty that you're sharing through the conversation. And I think for a lot of people listening, it will be a nice, not even just like a nice reminder, but also I think it's important for people to also realize that, I guess even through this conversation, but also through sort of other stuff, that they're not the only ones. There's others who are going through similar situations. They don't have to feel like they're the only ones.
Yes.
And no one understands how they're feeling. Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah. I also have to add as well, just because I did bring it up. Last year, early on in the year, I'm going to be honest with you, I had a really bad breakdown just to do with too much information in my head, to do with the world at large and everything going on. And I was at a point where I was just like, I needed to get out of here. So I finally went to Ghana for the first time. I went to Jamaica 3 times already, but this was something that should have been done a long time ago, but I finally did. And I would say overall, I was absolutely petrified for a variety of reasons to do with family history and also me being neurodiverse and everything else, which my father is in Ghana. He's been there for the last 10 years or so, largely for work and opportunity reasons. So he wasn't there through the whole process of me going through my diagnosis. So there's still a certain way in terms of him getting to grips with things. And I think me spending my 15 days over there also kind of helped him understand that. The reason I bring this up is, and funny enough, sorry to do this, but on the last episode I did on Audible Autism, I talked about my experiences in Ghana. And the expectations there are quite different. Accra is a very, very busy place. But also what is there is, in terms of autistic stuff, is geared towards children. And they also use the ABA format, which a lot of people have contentions with. And I would say agree because of like the kind of harm that does to children in that sense. It sticks with me. It's the reason that experience sticks with me is because not just in terms of the differences, but also because we were so often very busy and we got back late, and Ghana, when it's late in the evening, that's when the lights come on. It was very overwhelming to the senses. I don't think if I didn't have my medication or my CPAP machine or what have you, it would have been a very different experience. And I bring this also because, and this is an experience I think about all even now, one of the big things we went to Elmina Castle, which was St. Elmina. And it was a 4-hour drive to get there. We went there, and I say this, and people who know about Elmina, considering it's the oldest surviving European building in Africa, and it's a slave castle, the expectation would usually be it would be a difficult place to visit. And I'm not going to say that it wasn't. It was actually the second one of 2 castles we visited. But it was difficult in a way that was very unexpected, namely because of the tour group we had. Because I just want to say, one of the people was a guy who must have seen a griot and gave the history of the castle and was trying to test the tour guide's knowledge on it. There was a group of 4 people. They were all, 2 of them were French speakers, so they had a translator with them. And that's not an issue, but what the issue was, it was difficult to hear at times because there was a lot of echo in certain rooms. Our tour guide didn't exactly have the strongest voice. That also made it a challenge. And then on top of that, during this, at a certain point, it started raining out of the blue, and we didn't have any rain clothes. And that was the first time it had rained throughout the days we were there. And I don't know if it might have been a combination of the sea air and some food that we had. But my mother got ill, so she had to sit the rest of the tour out. And she had brought a tablet with her, so to record it, right? Mm-hmm. So suddenly, for a bit of it, I'm having to try and listen and record when I just wanted to take photos of my phone, but thankfully my old man took it off of me. And at a certain point midway, I mentally checked out. That was when, as you said, I felt the burnout there. And that was by the halfway point. We went through the rest of it, but I just remember at the end of the tour, when I got back to the car, I had to sit there and collect myself. And when they came back and sat there with me and we were driving off, the first thing I asked was, what the hell was that tour journey? Because we went to Christianborg Castle a couple days earlier. And to be fair, that place had only been opened recently. It was a government building, still is really, but a lot of the public didn't really know of it. But we had a better time there, partly because our group was mainly just us 3. The guide was very informative. We also went to Jonestown as well, one of the older areas. They were informative. They took their time. They knew what they were talking about. And it was really appreciative of it. Elmina, I'm glad I went, and I thought the town was absolutely lovely. But that whole experience, it was baffling to say the least.
Yeah, no, thank you very much for sharing. And I think that it gives a lot of useful information about sort of like how people can notice burnout in themselves, but also be aware of how they can develop and grow too. I'm thinking for these last 2 questions, they are similar-ish. So I I'm thinking the best way. So I'll ask one of them. I'll ask both of them one at a time. And if you do need me to repeat it, let me know. But you've kind of mentioned, like you mentioned in your intro, that, you're involved in a lot of different organizations that are doing incredible work. So you mentioned that you're a founding mentor of Autistic Empire. You're part of the Speaker Bureau. You're also, you're involved with History Matters as well.
Yes.
So the first bit is specifically focused on your roles within the Autistic Empire and the Speaker Bureau. So what problem were you trying to solve that existing services weren't addressing? How has essentially developing a service that is developing something that is by and for autistic adults changed the outcomes that you're now seeing?
Well, I would say, this is a very interesting, complicated question. So as far as my work with the Autistic Empire, I would say something that, as well as you mentioned, it's by autistic people, for autistic people. But I think something that makes us unique is we are an organization that advocates for autistic adults. And I think that is kind of unique because a lot of the focus for autistic advocacy and the discussion around it tends to be focused on children. And that's no disrespect that's not no disrespect or trying to disregard that. But it's a field that it's surprisingly there's not much there in terms of, not many organizations there, but also from my own experience, there is a certain sense as far as when you do get older, it's like you should have had certain things in place and understandings about yourself by now that makes it very challenging. I mean, there's people all even now who don't learn that they're on the spectrum until they're like well into middle age, and sometimes their lives have been rough. But we all have people who are involved in particular areas in terms of, we try to pay attention in terms of diversity and the different kinds of autistic people who are aware. We try to be an inclusive society. We acknowledge and accept that people who are on the spectrum also have, multiple conditions like myself. It's a very wide-ranging condition. Part of the thing with the podcasts that we've done is a focus is, breaking preconceived notions regarding what people would expect or assume what an autistic person is, but also in terms of addressing certain topics that are quite pertinent as well to autistic people, or at least that certain things that for somebody who is neurodiverse doesn't harm them as much for somebody who has, say, multiple neurotypical, have multiple neurodivergences like myself, for example. I mean, one of the episodes I'm quite proud of that I did is I spoke with somebody about being on the spectrum and dealing with the police because, quite frankly, the Met aren't exactly knowledgeable in that field in terms of how to deal with people, how to address things with people who are on the spectrum. And with what they know, more than likely it can just make situations worse in that aspect. And we've interviewed a variety of people, dancers. We've had an autistic spirit medium on at once. We've had just a very interesting array of people who have to do with it. And I think it's important because it's from them rather than parents or specialists or tutors. Not saying that they aren't valid, but I often find that the autistic person themselves is often the last person consulted on the matter. what's the other question? Just to refresh my memory, please.
So with this question, it was one talking about the problems that you were trying to solve. You were trying to solve that existing services aren't addressing, and then it was what has Spine for autistic adults changed in the outcomes you're now seeing.
I would say in the outcomes that we've been seeing in terms of how active we've been and just the variety of people who we've, raised, people who've come to learn about themselves, that they are on the spectrum, and try and understand what that means to them and how they process it. Also, we've tried to provide spaces for them to take part and engage with things. The speakers, as far as my part on the Speakers Bureau, now, it's a thing where I've only unfortunately done one talk as far as an event in terms of expressing ideas and doing a presentation. But it's a very enriching thing for me because it shows what I can do. And also to bring it back to what you're saying about university, it's me taking what I have learned and the skills that I have amassed and being able to bring that and reflect it back in a way to, how I see the world and other people to make it make sense to them. Because my approach is I don't try and go for like a broadness. I try to go for depth. So that way people have a better understanding. And also, as far as I acknowledge that I have a very particular perspective as far as where I come from. So it's always a question of how do I take this and then bring it back to the people in a way that they understand it? Because it's all well and good for me to try and bring in all this jargon, but it's a way of reflecting it in a sense of how other people understand it. As far as I know, I am probably the only person who's ever brought up the movie Belly with DMX and Nas in a presentation about being Black and autistic and trying to get into work. But it makes sense to me. And there's other people who would at least, they would know where I'm coming from in that regard. Funny enough, in sort of a personal sense, if there's been one or two times where I've had conversations where I've, just in public with certain people about what it's like for me. And it's interesting to hear or see their responses because they often don't know anybody or kind of take some of the things that is said out in the open about people people on the spectrum or people with disabilities on face value and for granted. And this was something I remember. It was particularly when I was in a barber shop. I had I got into a conversation with people and it led to that. And I went into the process of what it's like trying to get through PIP and how you have to go through that. And I remember when I broke it down at one point, the guy was asking me, so wait a minute, you mean to tell me, say if you was to come with like 3 or 4 different diagnoses and they're all like from accredited places, they're recognized and all that. And you mean to tell me it still all depends on whoever you're seeing on the day, whether you get this or not? And I said to him, brethren, I'm somebody who has 2. The only thing I regret not bringing up with him in the difficulties in terms of trying to get a diagnosis in the first place. And I remember as well when I brought up what happens if you don't get it and the surprise on their faces. And all I said to them was, look, I'm not trying to embellish anything. I'm just giving it to you how I had to go through it. And it was after some years when I didn't do it because my previous 2, years ago when I tried to apply for it twice, I didn't get it. So this is as far as it's a multifaceted and multiform thing. And as well, as much as I understand if this is a bit of a thorny topic, but just in terms of like I guess, some of the theories and ideas that people have about autism that is being spread around. It's really important to disseminate these things because oftentimes it might come from a well-meaning place, but I think when people bring up things to do with like MMR and those kind of things, they're only focusing on other people who haven't taken it or have taken it. They don't consider the people who are living with these conditions, and they don't realize how insulting sometimes the thing they say can be. So it's a multitude of different things that I think has been rather impactful. And honestly, I'm glad I'm still a member, even if in a certain sense my role is a bit, just in terms of like physically, it's a bit more limited than I would like. But no, I think it's valuable, and it's also important, I think, the fact that it's from the community and by the community in terms of support, because other organizations, in order to get funding from the government, they have to put out things that play into stereotypes and perceptions of autistic people as though they don't have lives and they're these sad, miserable people who are isolated from everybody else.
No, thank you. No, go. Sorry, I cut you off. You go ahead.
No, but I think it's important. And again, right, so there's certain things, again, as far as a race format in terms of vindication, that's how when they bring those sort of things up, that's how I think of Booker T. Washington, who is a man who, I find him a very frustrating historical figure for reasons to do with him and just the context of the times that he was in. And something that people don't realize with his famous Atlanta Expedition speech, or his Atlanta Compromise, as it's better known, is the fact that that speech is filled with him doing a lot of doublespeak and trying to be everything for everybody. And it's complicated and multifaceted, but in a certain sense, what he was doing as far as trying to appeal to the wealthy philanthropists of the day was trying to say, if you contribute money to me, then I can demonstrate to you that we as a people can be just as hardworking and industrious as the next white person, as the next white man is. And I think there are certain things that he did that were to be admired, but it's so particularly tied to the times that he was in, and especially in terms of his approach and his politics, that it's like, it's not surprising to me that, you know, he's kind of unpopular with a lot of people. And also, in a sense, why he doesn't kind of resonate in Britain, because he's sort of a uniquely American figure. It kind of comes about through people like Marcus Garvey, who I have my own particular thoughts on, who, the thing I would say with that differs with him and Booker T. Washington, they were both like ardent capitalists and everything, is that his stuff has this there's this militant charge behind it. And something that really surprised me when I read up on it, I mean, this is a man who I've known about from since I was a youth, right? Was to learn that he was a man who was asthmatic and was prone to getting sick. And that was an interesting surprise to me, because it was like, I see. So the pomp and regalia that you were showing in terms of trying to motivate the people was just that. It was advertising. It was a front. But it also says to me, you know, maybe at least as far as how I've heard him talked about, it's like, you had your foibles and your issues to deal with just like the rest of us, right? And it's not like as if any of our greats didn't have their own particulars and issues they had to deal with. Like William Coffey, the charterist, had part of his knee joints like tied, not tied, but like was stuck together. Claudia Jones had to deal with tuberculosis for the bulk of her days. The Black Panthers did work with disability, even if it was just mainly in a physical sense. So, it's something that's important. It's something that's worth reconsidering and factoring in, at least as far as my viewpoint. I will admit, from my end with Sarah, who's in charge, there's been a couple times for me where, at least in terms of speaking positions, because as you can tell, I'm very pointed and outspoken, I think it's better if she takes it, just because I know I would end up ruffling more feathers with certain things and certain people. But sometimes that it needs to be done and it needs to be met and needs to be addressed. And like I said, why can't we just accept the variety of us in all, in terms of blackness and all our different things? Some of it, I think, in terms of why people reject it is because they think just being pro-black is enough, when honestly it's not, and can be kind of limiting. But also because the focus has been on trying to survive and being on the defense to try and minimize as much harm as possible. It can be, it's a contradiction that sometimes I think people, because they're just brought up in it, they don't sort of question it or second guess it as like, hang on, maybe this isn't entirely working. But no, I just think it's something it's just in terms of like dissecting that all this. These are the sort of things that just go on in my mind as far as, with the kind of work that I do, or at least try to do. And if anybody wants me to go and do like a talk or a presentation, I'm more than happy to do so.
Yeah, no, honestly, thank you very much for that. And we've come to the final question of the episode, which is, as I mentioned, you obviously are involved with History Matters, and you're challenging the underrepresentation in history for African and Caribbean heritage students and teachers.
Yes.
So my question to you is, where do you think universities need to start? So whether this is through the curriculum, through staffing, through methods of assessment or culture, to make inclusion real rather than performative?
Well, I would say some of this is difficult because the university as an institution is like conservative in and of itself, and not conservative in a political sense, but in terms of trying to maintain its status. But I would say for a starting point, just like, we aren't strange. We as Black people in this country, we're not strangers. Something that I try and explain to my American friends is that British racism isn't reflected through law, it's reflected through immigration policy. So it's that, as well as like the xenophobia. But I would say grants being brought back is one thing. I've never been for tuition fees. In fact, I'm part of the first generation who had to pay these raised tuition fees. And something that always gets my ire is the fact that I remember many people who were friends of mine who thought, right, I'm going to do apprenticeship. So they never really got the chance. And stop just trying to pressure students into making them take certain subjects and, diminishing and chastising others. Also, the whole thing of like just cutting off certain courses if they're not making enough numbers is awful. It's trying to apply monetary values to things where the value in it is beyond that or something else to that, and it never, ever lines up. Yeah, but also just generally in a larger sense, I said this earlier, Britain is a country where it's like the way in which it frames things is though, and I think it's the great lie of it, is often that it's the passive participant in this, where everything was all mapped out accordingly, everything was familiar to people and they were safe, and then these strangers came in and disrupted things and brought out this ugliness out of people that wasn't there before. And I think a lot of that is because for the longest time, the idea was there was no history of Black people in this country until from, before 1948. And I think time is starting to go on where people realize actually that wasn't the first time there was any contact. It was actually the first time we were there in larger numbers. There's history of people here going all the way back to the Tudors. Hell, if you want to talk about specifically an African presence, you can go all the way back to when the Romans were here. And if there was more of an honesty and also people not being so cynical and trying to play into these simplistic ideas for money and also in terms of getting votes, the understanding wouldn't just be better for Black people. It would also be a thing that I think for English people would be better in terms of understanding themselves. And also losing that sense of entitlement that I think is something that is key. Yeah. But I think, the problem is it's not that there hasn't been any qualified Black professionals. It's that they never were given the chance, by and large. So there's had to take their skills elsewhere or their scholarship elsewhere, or even just do it in the community, which I think that's valuable and should always be maintained. And let me just say as well, before I finish, when I speak on these things, I think oftentimes when people talk about these things, the focus is always squarely on London or the other major cities. Where also it's kind of ignoring people who live sometimes in home counties or in villages where there may be the only people there. And for them, for people who live in the city, how they go about and how they try to fend for themselves is in ways that to us might look like as if they're just standing there and taking it. But when the numbers are stacked up against them, it's rather difficult. So they're just as valuable in terms of this as well. And especially in terms of like countryside and all those places. We've been, pardon me to bring out the patois, but we've been did it. We've been did it. So I'm not saying this is it to be like, oh, I want to go and throw up the Union Jack and now I think I have the courage to go to the last night of the proms. No. But the better understanding for people so they don't feel, one side doesn't feel like they're total strangers and the other side doesn't feel like, they don't get so defensive and at times violent in terms of seeing people around them, because a lot of that is unnecessary and has done more harm than good. And at the end of the day, when they're trying to push this idea of like, we need to get them out of here or clamp down on borders, it's like, what is the end game of that? Because I know if they were to try and really do that, then that would open a myriad of questions and difficulties that I don't think some of the people espousing these ideas would really want to confront. I apologize. I must have been rambling all over the place there.
No. It was there.
Yeah. If it was up to me, I would be, there's certain things where if it was up to me, I would be like, knock it down and start over. Really and truly. But if I have to, in terms of just sticking to the framework of the question and in terms of, because small gains are just as important as the big gains, those are the things I would bring up. And when I talk about this stuff, I often think as me and you as Black men, because it often seems to only get framed through the lens of if Black men are doing all right, then everybody else should be able to follow suit. And it doesn't work like that. And I've never been fond of that myself. So as far as the Black women and the Black trans people and the Black, whoever else, the non-binaries, whoever else who've been putting the work, and often those people have been at the front, really been at the front lines of all these things. I tip my hat to all of them. I really and truly do. And I think those people should be celebrated and should be valued.
No, thank you for sharing. And yeah, we've now come to the end of the episode. It's been great speaking to you, Odai, about your journey, your career. But also, like I mentioned, your clear passion for supporting and creating inclusive spaces. Before we wrap up, we always let our guests share how people can connect with them or the organization or organizations they're from. So how could people find out a bit more about the work that you do? How could they connect with you personally? If you've got any events, or I'll be honest, the episode, it may come out in a few weeks' time. So if you've got anything else planned for the rest of the year that you'd like to also highlight, please do feel free to share. This is your opportunity to let me know.
let me start plugging then. So the Audible Autism podcast you can find at audibleautism.autisticempire.com, and you can listen to it on Spotify, and Anchor and iTunes and all the various other hosting sites. The Autistic Empire, you can look for that on autisticempire.com. You can join to become a member. There we've got contact details. We sell alert cards and t-shirts as well for people. As far as, say, if you want to email us, you can email us at teamautisticempire.com. And you can also, through the contacts page, you can join our Discord channel. On History Matters, there's also a site there as well. It is, excuse me one second, historymatters.online. I'm not a historian, but I'm somebody who's involved with the group. And I have to give credit to Hakeem Addy, who, I messaged him one day and I said I'd like to be involved, but I wasn't sure if I would join because of I'd be allowed to join considering what I studied, but he said it would be fine. There's History Matters _journal, if I remember right. The Autistic Empire, we have a YouTube channel and an Instagram. As far as contacting me, I just tend to keep to myself, but I am in the Discord for the Empire and I am active. And if you are on the spectrum and you want to be a guest, in every episode, there's a link to a space where you can write about yourself and we will look through and read it and get in contact with you if you want to be a guest on an episode. We're very appreciative of that. And especially seeing as it's the start of the new year, getting some new episodes out there would be really, really good and well done. So there we are.
Thank you very much. And thank you to you, our wonderful audience, for coming back to another episode. If you like this episode, like, comment, and subscribe is always appreciated. If you want to make sure that you don't miss any other episodes on the Pick Up the Mic YouTube channel, then please make sure that you click the notification bell at the bottom of the video. If you are interested in receiving cool merch or getting discounts at our events, because as you'll see, we're hosting a number of events this year. And if you want to make sure that you receive some discounts, get some cool merch, or discounts on some cool merch, then please make sure that you check out our community support pages. So you can either support through Patreon, you can either support through YouTube channel membership, or you can either support through Buy Me a Coffee, all which are listed down below in the description. And then finally, if you're interested in sci-fi and fantasy, gaming, or anime, you can check out our 3 podcasts that cover those individual areas. So for sci-fi and fantasy, you're looking for the Two Maesters channel. For anime, you're looking for for Senseis of Anime, and for gaming, you're looking for Pick Up the Controller. And you can find all those on the For You page. So if you head to the For You page, scroll down, you'll be able to see all 3 of those YouTube channels. Subscribe to them, hit the notification bells, because they're all going to be releasing new episodes within this year too. But yeah, we'll wrap up everything there. Thank you very much again, Odai, for your incredible work that you're doing and your incredible story.
Thank you. My pleasure. If you ever want me back, don't hesitate to get in contact with me.
No, I really appreciate that. Thank you so much. And thank you again to you, our wonderful audience. That's a bye from us here. Enjoy the rest of your wonderful days, and we will speak to you soon. So take care, and bye from us here.